What's up, guys? I am here at Crown Resorts getting ready for the Aussie Millions main event to kick off. We are going to be streaming every single day over on Twitch on runitup.tv. We've got the $10,000 buy-in main event, the $100,000 buy-in challenge, and the $250,000 buy-in super high roller event, all live streamed with whole cards over on runitup.tv. I will see you guys there. Their snapback. So who wants a hat? Yeah, let's do a hat. Let's do it. All the guys that got large? That's you? Okay, perfect. Okay. No, dude, thank you for coming. Are you crazy? 1, 2, 3. Why do you play poker? What a great and basic question, right? I feel like very often people approach poker in a way that is incongruent with that question. There are, to me, 3 reasons why people play poker, right? The reason number 1, it's fun. It's fun, right? I enjoy playing the game of poker. It's a fun challenge. We're trying to outfox our opponents for cash, right? That's pretty cool, right? So I think number 1, it's just straight up enjoyment. Number 2, I feel the most common reason people play poker is for the social engagement, right? It's fun to play with other people, play with your friends, play with your parents. I started playing poker with my parents and my grandma, 5-card draw back in 2000. I remember it was the New Year's Eve in 2000 was my first time playing poker. So social, I think, being social is a big reason people play poker. And then the third reason, of course, is to make money. And I feel like very often people in poker kind of don't have a clear sense of which of those they're trying to pursue. It doesn't have to be just one or the other, but I feel like people very often don't structure their studying decisions. For instance, if your goal is to play poker to make money, if you're not studying very much off the table, what are you doing? You're leaving money on the table, you're not maximizing your edges, you're not maximizing your performance in tournaments, right? So if your goal is to make money playing poker, you gotta put work in, right? There's no way around that. But if your goal is to have fun and to be social, well, it's not nearly as important to study hands or review, like deep, dark training site videos, right? It's just not as important. So I feel like whenever someone comes to me and starts telling me about their interactions with poker, I like to ask, well, why are you playing? Why do you play the game? And it's important, I think, to have a clear understanding of that as you progress. How do you play live poker? What are the first steps to becoming a successful live poker player? One of my favorite moments in my entire poker career was, I had already been successful playing online poker for a few years, maybe like 4 or 5 years. I was 21, 22 years old when I became friends with Dale Negreanu. You guys all must know Dale Negreanu here. And I had the absolute privilege of having him as a mentor of mine. And I remember the very first time that I told Daniel a hand that I had played, I was like, okay, so yeah, I was on the river and he bet, and the board was, this and that, whatever. He bet, or I bet, and he raised, and I don't know what to do. And Daniel goes, well, what did the guy look like? And I was like, what did he look like? I just didn't even strike me as a thing like I should have been aware of as a 22-year-old kid who had mostly just played online. So what I learned from that conversation and many other conversations from Daniel is that it's very important to look at your opponent and get a sense of, well, what are his eyes doing? What are his hands doing? How much did he bet? Did he bet with a stack of chips, or did he throw his chips out there when he made his bet? What is his neck doing? What are his eyes doing? What is his neck doing? One of the most important tells in poker that people don't really look for is the neck tell. People who just get nervous or get excited and go boom, 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 boom. Next time you're playing poker, I recommend just watching people. And the thing about being a live detective, as I have it out there, is that I like to coach my students and people who watch the stream to imagine that you're building a profile on your opponent. That you're saying, okay, I've got a person here, and I think this person is mid-30s, they're dressed in a suit and tie, probably a business person, and then as your experience continues, you say, okay, you listen, hear what this person is saying. You watch this person and go, okay, this person seems like they know what they're doing. They're handling their chips very smoothly. They're riffling their chips, so they must play a lot. And you take these little bits of information and bring them together. There is so much information out there, particularly in live poker, that's available for us to take advantage of. That I think that If you're an intermediate or advanced live player, your number one goal should be building profiles on your opponents. Not a permanent profile, let it evolve and see how the players are feeling and losing and winning and going from there. Any questions about live poker? People have had challenges playing live, interesting situations. Yes, sir. I have advised many of my students in the past to watch the player that they're most likely to come into conflict with, right? You know when you sit down at a table, there are players who are going to be troublemakers, right? You just know when this happens. So I advise them to say, watch this player. Don't look at the board. Don't look at your card or your chips or anything you're out of the hand, right? Just watch and see what this guy is looking like to you. Does this player look weak? Does this player look strong? And I think that if you're doing this and you watch the player through the hand, see what he turns over, which of course the player might not turn over a hand that particular time, but if you're watching 10 different hands, one of the hands is going to show down, and then compare that to your read. When you're watching this person, watching their eyes, their neck, their mouth, how they bet, what hand they bet with, all the different things. Are they scratching their head? Are they, watch these things and say, all these clues. I thought this was weak. Oh, it turns out this was actually strong. The guy had quads. Okay, great. Well, you build these things together, and I think you can kind of take those bits of information that other players might miss out on and use that to your advantage. I don't wear sunglasses, though it makes it easier to be a psycho and stare at people, of course. I've had friends of mine that always wear sunglasses. One of my good friends, actually, I had watched him play from the rail for maybe like 6 hours when I just got started, and I could actually do that. So I sat in the rail and watched my friend play, and that was over. I was like, I think you have very honest eyes, which is not a terrible thing in life, but in poker, it's pretty bad, right? And ever since, he's worn sunglasses. And he won a bracelet, actually, in 2010, and a heads up of it. Wearing glasses the whole time. So what I would say to you is it's up to your comfort level. In 2016, people are moving away from sunglasses as a default accessory at the poker table. But you know what? If you're playing the Aussie Millions final table, no one's gonna ask 2 questions about why you're wearing sunglasses. So that's actually a great question. The question is about, do I know my own live tells, and what do I do to counteract that? It's a little too slow, Adam. Yeah. So it's actually a hilarious question, because here at the Aussie Millions, 8 years ago, this is my second time here, and when I was here 8 years ago, I met Paul Wasika for the very first time, and he had just came off getting second to Jamie Gold, who was all about live tells and all those other things. And Paul told me, again, this was very early in my career, I'm 28 now, I was 20 when I came here the first time, and Paul told me that for him, it wasn't about necessarily does he have tells or does he give off anything. It was he actually went a level above that and said, I try to exude a certain feeling to make my opponents think I have a certain sort of hand or that I am doing a certain thing. And again, kind of like what Daniel said, I was like, whoa, right? Like it was like, it kind of blew my mind at the time because I had never really thought of poker like that. So do I have live tells? Surely I must. Have I studied that to the degree that I can tell you, like, oh yeah, if I wiggle my ear, I'm definitely weak? Like, no, I don't know that for sure, but I think that if you're a player who's going to play live poker often, man, it's not too hard to set up a camera at like a home game sort of table, whether it's focused on you or one person per week or however you're going to do it, and just study that tape after the fact. So the question is about satellite poker versus main event poker. Same thing like sit and goes or any shorter session is going to be much harder to compile information on opponents, right? Of course, you're playing with someone for 20 hands or 50 hands. It's going to be much harder than the cash game where you play with someone for 6 months, right? So in that situation, what I would say to you is that you want to try to accumulate information and utilize that better than your opponents. You don't have to do it great. You just have to do it better than other people are doing it. That's really the best I can tell you about that, because no one's going to be able to do much with that, right? The question is, can you do it better than your opponents? Let's go where it is. People always ask, what advice would you give me playing this tournament for, maybe it's the biggest one you've ever played or whatever it is. The first thing I tell people is, you have to, or at least you ought to, study the structure, right? The structure of the tournament depends very much, like every tournament is different. How long are the levels? When do the antes kick in? How big are the antes? We're going to talk about the antes coming up next. We're going to talk about, is there a dinner break? When are the blinds making a big jump? Some tournaments go from 2,000, 4,000 to 3,000, 6,000. Some tournaments go from 25, have a level in between there. It's important to kind of know those things so you can strategize in advance and go, okay, there's a big ante jump when we go from, let's say, in Commerce, I believe they have a 600, 1,200, 200 level, and it goes to 8, 16, 300. The ante goes up, the blinds go up. That's the level that you should be increasing your aggression in because there's more to play for in the pot, proportionally to the level before. So studying the structure and saying, okay, when are the blinds going up, when are the antes kicking in, and strategizing around that is very important. Daniel talks about this a lot too. He talks about having an intention to win. When you play a tournament, your intention should be to win, right? Everyone's like, yeah, of course it should be. Well, if that's your goal, what are you doing to make that happen? What are you doing to actually ensure that's happening? Are you going out the night before and partying and getting drunk and doing all these things? Are you getting a breakfast in the morning? I know you are. Like, are you getting yourself? Are you eating in the morning before play begins? If you're not taking those edges, other people are doing those things. You're giving something up by not going to bed early the night before. You're giving something up by not having a breakfast that morning. So I think it's important that you plan out. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus all my energies on this. Go back to think, why do you play poker? If you sit here and go, you know what? I play poker for fun. I don't care if I win or lose. Great, go out, have a blast. That's fine. But if you're sitting here and you go, you know what? Okay, this is my main event. I'm going to try to win. Well, you're doing everything in your power to make sure that happens. Many people don't. And these accumulated edges, they pile up quick. Any questions about that, like preparing for the main event? Or if any of you guys are playing the main event tomorrow, or even if it's your own main event, you're playing a 1K or something like that, any questions about that, or as far as preparations or anything like that?
Do you study your opponents?
Sure.
Do you study your opponents?
Sure, the question is, do you study your opponents at final tables? Now, actually, I've played poker myself for many years, but I used to invest in other players who would make final tables. And so the night before, they would know they're playing a final table of 6. Actually, here at Aussie Millions, there's a gap of time between the last day of play and the final table. Like, I'm sure, like for the 100K, there's a 5-day gap. In the main event, there's a 1-day gap. And so you have time to go back and study your opponents, watch footage, read about what are their lifetime earnings, right? It's important just to get a guess of these things. If you don't know the players like personally, it's important to go back there and say, okay, how much money has this player won? What country is this player from? You can find things about the age of the player. Is this going to be the biggest stage of their life? Always good to know that, right? Because you can put pressure on players you think are going to feel the moment. So absolutely, if you know who you're competing against, do that research. It's out there. Internet is a beautiful thing, right? Google these players and just see what it is. It doesn't take much work to check Pendant Mob, which is a statistics database, to check just general Google results. See what they've been doing. Is this their biggest cash in a long time? Is their biggest cash $2,000? And now here they are on day 5 of the Aussie Millions. That player is going to play very differently than, again, a Phil Ivey or Daniel Negreanu. So it's very important to kind of study that, and you can cater your strategy to set opponents. All right, probably my favorite question on this list up here is big blind defense and why antes make the world go round. Now, some of you have watched me play on Twitch before, right? Let's just see a show of hands. People who have watched me on Twitch. Okay, nice, I love it, thank you guys. So, if there's one position at the poker table that I play differently than most players, it's out of the big blind. And people always go, Jay Carter, you play so many hands out of the big blind. And usually it's followed by, you suck. But that's not true though. At least I'm pretty sure it isn't true. So the fact of the matter is, when you're in the big blind, you can defend very profitably, in my opinion, because, especially in tournaments, well I should say, you can defend profitably if there are antes. And the importance of antes in tournament poker, because there's not too many cash games normally spread that have antes, though those that do are usually better games because there's more action. And that is, of course, because antes encourage people to play pots. Imagine a poker game where there were no blinds and there were no antes. What would the right strategy be in that game? Yeah, relax and fold till you have aces. It's a good combination, right? If there's nothing to fight for, you're not paying anything to sit at the table, the correct strategy is to just sit and wait. Now imagine a poker game where you sat down with $100 and the ante was $5 every hand. No blinds, but $5 every hand. So an 8-handed game is $40 in the pot every hand. What's the right strategy there? Attack, right? We're fighting, battling for all that money that's out there. So if you believe those two things are true that I just said, it's very important to say, okay, what are the antes? How big are they? And how does that influence our strategy? If we're playing people who are playing too tight, people who are folding too much, they're over folding in certain positions, we're making a lot of money by attacking in these situations, right? Imagine we're playing a tournament and the blinds are 100, 200 with no ante. You have 300 to go after in every hand, right? Now imagine a tournament where you had a 100, 200 blinds with a 50 chip ante. All of a sudden, at an 8-handed game, we have significantly more money to go after. It's 700 in the pot every time. Two and a third times more money in the pot. That has to influence our strategy, and it does so most often in the big blind, right? In the big blind, we're already in for 200, right? We're already in for 200 in this instance. Somebody makes it 400 chips. We're in the big blind. We have to call 200 more. In this super ante scenario, we're getting like 5 to 1 to defend here. Right? You can see, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I'm getting excited thinking about it, okay? So, it's important to realize that and go, if you're getting 5 to 1 in a certain scenario, you have to win that hand, 1 in 6 times to break even. You're gonna flop a pair or better a third of the time. Not that a pair is always good, mind you, but if you feel confident in your post-flop decision-making abilities, or just trying to, learn and improve, you want to battle in that arena, right? Because you're getting such a good price to try. Right? It's one of those things where you're just like incentivized to take a shot because of the antes. And to me, the big blind position is the position that most players mess up to this day. You have to think when someone raises, let's say someone makes it 400. They make it 400. We're in a normal game, 100, 200 with a quarter ante. They raise to 400 middle position. We have a hand like, let's say we have a hand like ace 4 suited. Who is defending that hand in the big blind? I better see a lot of hands, oh my lord. Yeah, we're defending that hand, of course we are, right? 200 to win $1 billion. Ace 4 suited, that's a pretty good hand, okay? Who's defending King 4 suited? All right, leave the hands up in the air, people. I want to see some defenders here, okay? So, who's defending Queen 4 suited? Jack 4 suited? I can see some pain, but, come on, 10 4 suited? The question is, we have to draw a line somewhere, of course, right? But it's important to be aware of how much the antes mathematically incentivize us to battle on those spots. And also, of course, from an aggressive point of view, if it folds to the button and the two blinds are folding way too much, well, we're incentivized. Our steal in the button only has to work a fraction of the time if there are antes in play, right? Imagine if there are no antes in play. We're risking 400 chips. Let's say we're again the same scenario. We're going to raise to 400. There's 300 in the middle. Doesn't have to work that often for us to show a profit. Plus, of course, we're going to see some post-flop scenarios and all those other things. If there are antes involved, all of a sudden the mathematical balance weighs much more in our favor. We're much more incentivized to attack. Does that all make sense? I like that. The general advice that I would give 90% of poker players that are going to come to me is that I would say if you're first in the pot, especially in a tournament, you should raise. Cash games, I would actually say it's true, actually. In almost every instance. If you're first in the pot, you probably should open for a raise. Because if you call, you can't win the blinds and antes if there are antes. You can't win, right? You're going to have to see a flop and go from there. If you raise, they could just fold and you just win, right? Having that chance of folding, called fold equity in poker, having that chance of folding is so critical for your overall win rate and your overall chance of success. Cash games, there are definitely dynamics where you see games that are very call-heavy. Players are always calling, always calling, always calling. And if you're going to raise, you got to raise a lot. So there are definitely viable strategies that incorporate lots of calling. Tournament strategies as well. We've seen some players move towards calling on the button, calling in the small blind. If you guys watch me play, I call a lot out of the small blind too. Instead of raising, I've done that for many years. Again, taught by Daniel. So I feel like there are many ways you can approach poker in those situations, but they're all based on the math and the ratio you're being offered. You should do that based on how the antes apply and all those other things from there. So we're talking about small blind defense in this situation, right? How do we play out of the small blind against a raise? Well, this is one of those situations where it's impossible for me to prescribe you an answer, right? Where I say, oh, yeah, we just call, right? It doesn't quite apply, right? Poker is a beautiful game because no situation is exactly the same. Right? Different opponents, different dynamic, different understanding of what's going on, different stacks, right? So, to me, what I would say is, we live in an era where there is such a beautiful world of information to take advantage of. You can watch me on Twitch, you can watch Jamie Staples, you can watch Nanonoko, you can watch, Elkie, all these guys who have ridiculous amounts of success in poker, and you can say, okay, every time they're in the small blind, watch and see what they do. And what I do, and what Nanonoko does, and what Negranu does, is different, for sure. But the beautiful thing about Twitch, YouTube videos, training videos, books, there's such a diversity of amazing material to learn from these days. you can kind of say, particularly in the video training realm on YouTube and on Twitch, you can listen to hear why they're doing certain things. Why are they calling in this spot? Why are they raising in this spot? Why are they folding in this spot? And by then, you can kind of compare what they're saying to your thought process and learn that way. Because there's really no way I can just say, oh yeah, you should call this, raise this. It always depends. So watch other players and see what they do and compare that to your own thought process. Building a logical foundation. So I think very often in poker, players have emotional reactions to hands, right? I love to see, I don't love to see it, I suppose, but I see people who lose hands and they get mad, they get upset. They were 80% to win and they lose and they're like, okay, well, sure, great, but like, if you've got your money in a profitable situation, to me, I think it's most important to say, okay, what could I have done better, if anything? You know, how could I have won more? How could I have lost less in a certain situation, right? To me, I feel like being emotional about these things is a waste of energy versus just being productive, constructive, and proactive about these situations and saying, okay, so what can we have done to actually make this better? And I feel like, once again, like we talked about before, it's not necessarily about not reacting emotionally. We've all been there, right? We have aces, they have deuce nine suited, somehow they win. We're like, what in the world just happened here? The thing is, you have to try to react better than your opponents would react in that same scenario. If the cards were reversed, maybe your opponent goes from playing at a 95 out of 100, he loses this 9 deuce hand, and he goes down to a 70, starts spewing money, starts, getting upset, starts drinking, and his one loss ends up costing him, 2 times what he just originally lost. But for you, because you're a bleep, bloop, bleep, bloop robot, and you don't feel anything emotionally, you go, you know what? Okay, I was 89% to win. I didn't. That's going to happen 1 in 10 times. It's a lot of losing in poker, right? We say, okay, I did nothing wrong. I go from a 95 to a 93, and don't spew off nearly as much as my opponent did. So this again kind of comes down to having that logical mindset, fostering that logical perspective. Because of course, we have to understand that if we're going to play, let's say we're going to play 1,000 tournaments. It's a lot of tournaments, right? Sounds like a lot. You can play tournaments at Crown for 10 years and not play 1,000 tournaments. I'm sure they'd love for you to try, but it's going to be very hard to do that, right? So even in 1,000 tournaments, you're going to bust out of the money 850 times. Realize that. When you're playing a tournament, most likely you're going to lose, right? All you can do is try to make more deep runs than our opponents. We can react better to negative variance. We can make better runs when we get lucky in certain spots, right? And of those 150 times that we make the money, of those times, we're going to cash minimally 2/3 of those times. So then we have 50 runs that are like, okay, we have a chance here to really crush it. So it's about making the most of those. It's about me having 60 and one of you guys having 45. Because I put the time in. I've prepared for the main event. I've studied the game. I've been practicing for the moment, right? Eminem style. I'm not going to blow this, right? Mom spaghetti and all that, right? Yeah, okay. I was like, all right, you guys have that enough study, right? Okay. So, okay. So, yeah, it's important to not let those moments slip, right? So, I think that we get to those spots by being logical, by being ruthlessly logical, right? I think if you have that relentlessly logical mindset, we're going to find that we're going to have more deep runs, better reactions to poker, generally just be happier in life as well if you're processing this logically. Now, I'm open to any questions on here about logical reactions, about the difference between keeping emotions out of our poker logical thought process. Any questions on bankroll management's impact on tilt, variance, and happiness? This is actually kind of similar to the sense of the logical point we just made here, in that I find that there are very often players who have, let's say they have, $5,000 in their poker bankroll. You go, okay, and they play games like 5-10 or 2-5. These games are pretty big buy-in games, $500 buy-in games, $1,000 buy-in games, and they lose, and then they rightly feel devastated. They just lost 1/5 of their bankroll or 1/10 of their bankroll, and they feel upset and they feel angry because they lost a big portion of what they have. And this to me is a fatal flaw of many poker players who are aspiring to play to make money, but they don't quite have the bankroll management skills to survive the swings of the game, and as such, it makes it hard to think logically when you lose 1/5 of your poker bankroll, things like that. So to set a general baseline, most players that are playing for fun, again, top of the question, if you're playing for fun, you might not have a poker bankroll. You might just say, I just play for fun, whatever. Okay, that's fun, that's certainly okay. But if you're upset when you lose, you might want to think about setting aside an app, like a budget more or less for poker, or some sort of an allocation set aside, and you go, okay, this is what I'm gonna play. This is the money I'm gonna play with here when I'm trying to win, and that I'm trying to play poker, and that whether you win or lose, then okay. But if you're trying to play poker for profit, in that profit category, I think it's very important to have at least 30 buy-ins for the game you're playing regularly. If you're playing 2-5, that means if it's a $5 buy-in game, that means $15,000. It's a lot of money. But by doing that, you can survive the swings of things. When you lose the 9-2 suited, you're okay, pull out more money, you can keep playing. If you don't have the bankroll for that, you're going to feel the swings much more painfully and potentially have it impact not just your on-table play, but your general life happiness, right? We've all been there, right? We're playing online, we're playing, in a poker room, we lose, we go home, and someone at home is like, how'd you do? Oh Lord, don't even ask, right? And that sucks, right? We don't want to make those around us feel bad because we went and lost, right? Like, of course it happens, we say, okay, look, I tried, it didn't work, whatever. But having a proper bankroll to say, listen, we're going to treat this like a business. I have a certain amount of money. There are going to be swings in poker. The graphs of everybody's poker life, even winning players, it's not straight up, right? There's a lot of ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs. So I think it's very important to realize that, and we defeat those swings by having enough money to survive the variance. There's only been maybe 2 times in my life where I couldn't sleep at night because of a poker loss. Once I was maybe 18 and a half years old, and I lost half of my bankroll in one night, which was not very wise. I remember very much. I told this story on stream before, but I had an open-ended straight flush draw, ace of clubs, 8 of spades on a 9-10 jack all spades board. Not a terrible hand, but my opponent I believe he had king of spades, jack, for a better pair and a better flush draw, and I was 20% to win a $50,000 pot when I was 18 and a half years old, upstairs in my parents' house. So that night, I remember, after having lost that hand, I remember going to bed and being like, wow, that sucked. That was not fun at all. And I remember being sad that night, for sure. Like, oh man, it was painful, for sure, of course. I lost a lot of my net worth in one hand, more or less. And by the time I woke up in the morning, I was dedicated and mad. I was like, all right, we're gonna have to try to grind here again. Of course, I moved way down in stakes, and I had to rebuild, And that was one of those moments where I could have quit. And said, you know what? I'm gonna take the rest of my money out. I still had about $50K left from poker only, all from nothing. So I recommitted to the game. I said, you know what? I'm going to just study harder. I'm going to put more time into poker, and I'm going to try to get back to those games. It didn't feel like I couldn't win. It just felt like that one night I just made a dumb mistake, and it cost me a lot of money. So no, to answer your question, I've never said I'm definitely going to quit. It's over, but it's not crazy if you feel that way. If you feel that way and go, you know what? I'm not sure if this is for me. If you've gone through a long losing stretch, here's not something I would prescribe to any of you guys, but when I dropped out of college to play poker professionally, back now, I guess it was like seven or 8 years ago at this point, I didn't crush tournaments, quit school, I have my Ferrari, no, that was not how my life went at all, right? I lost maybe 60 or 70,000 of my maybe $100,000 bankroll over an 8-month period. It was a long downswing, and in January, whatever year that was, after 6 or 7 months of losing, I was like, you know what? I've been enjoying poker these last 6 or 7 months. Despite losing all this money, this is still actually pretty fun. And I said, I had already been successful. I started with $0 in my bankroll. I started with nothing, and I ran it up to everything that I have today. And I remember having like 30 grand left over, and I said, you know what? I want to try really hard. If it can be fun with 7 months of breaking even and losing, it can only get better than this, right? My mom did not agree, by the way. But about 5 months later, I had actually, won my first big tournament online. I won $100,000 a night on full tilt, and life, more or less, ever since then was, green grass and high tides forever, as the song goes. Back in those days, which are the glory days of American online poker, I was playing back in 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008. I would play more or less whatever they had. I would play tournaments, I'd play cash games, but I started playing limit hold'em, and I moved to no limit hold'em cash games, and then I moved to tournaments maybe about 2009, and then I played mostly tournaments exclusively. I still played cash, to be honest, for a few years after that, but yeah, started in limit hold'em, moved to no limit cash, and then tournaments. Yeah, I would play no more than usually like 6 tables of cash or 9 tournaments at a time, which is a lot, but no, I'm a nerdy video gaming kid. 9 tables. Now I know there's 24 tables, it's crazy. If you guys know Randy Lou, who is here at Aussie Millions, he actually, when he streams, plays 12 tables and has just 1 on the stream, which is absurd to me. But yeah, multi-tabling is one of those things where if you're feeling comfortable, you think you can handle it, play 2 tables, play 4 tables. Once you leave 4 tables, it's very hard to pay attention to the games, of course. Any more questions on that whole point in those side notes? Yes, sir.
Have you ever had like an instant where the internet cut off playing online?
Have you ever had a moment where your internet has cut off playing online poker? Yes, actually. I have had that happen to me a few times. I've had it happen to me in tournaments, which is a nightmare, right? You're deep in a tournament, 50 left, 400,000 for first. We're gonna do it, guys. We're gonna do it. I'm in 3rd place. Power spin. Okay. Do you wait? Do you stay in the house? Do you go to a hotel? Do you call a friend? Like, it's just like panic time, right? Not like this. I've had it happen in cash games before. The time that I remember most losing my internet, it was a 40-80 online cash game. And I remember betting on, I think it was a re-raise pot. I bet on the flop. I bombed it on the turn. I had nothing though. And the pot had maybe 10,000 in it at that point, and then power went out. So I had nothing. He had already called me before it died, so I knew I was going to win the hand. I was drawing completely stoned in. So it worked out that I came back to the table and I was like, oh man, I had a set, brutal. I had nothing, so 4 points here. Networking in poker. This is one of those things where I feel like I had been undercoached, underappreciated this, and it's one of those things that if you guys are aspiring poker players, whether you're trying to play professionally, semi-professionally, or anything, networking is so important, right? For 2 reasons. 1, making friends who are better poker players than you provides you a resource that can help you get better, right? That's the only way you can improve. If I look back at my career, I was so lucky to make friends with guys like Daniel Negron and one of my best friends, Vivek, who was he graduated college at 18 years old and was a math wizard, genius kid, and I was more of like a gut feel instinct guy. And because he was my best friend, we shared every bit of knowledge with each other, and it helped so much because he knows the math, this is what you're supposed to do, and I was like, what you got? And together, I kind of learned a little bit from both of our worlds and made me a better player, and made him a little bit better too. Right? So networking in poker is so important from the knowledge sharing point of view, but also, of course, from the action trading, action selling, general advice. Oh, hey, there's a tournament. They're going to miss their guarantee. Better head over there. There's some value. Oh, hey, friend, do you want to trade 5% in the main event? Do you want to trade 10%, my 5 for your 5, my 10 for your 10 in the series of tournaments? And by doing that, you kind of avoid a little bit more of the swings in poker, right? Because if I have 10% of Phil and you 10% of me, then it's a good deal for you, buddy. I'm just telling you. But that's great because we have a little bit less of a chance of both losing on the same trip, right? Especially if you're going to travel or play more regularly. It's a good way to survive. The question is, do I feel pros trading pieces is kind of like cheating? The only time that I think it becomes an issue is, let's say we're playing 3-handed. And you and I have half of each other, and that player doesn't know. That massively changes the game, right? And that, in my opinion, is beyond unethical. Not sure it counts as cheating, to be honest, but it's definitely beyond the gray line of dirty. You're in the dark, dark, dark blackness at that point, right? I've been in a situation like this where I had a quarter of someone else in a tournament at the final table that I was at. We're playing for $1 million+ for first, but he didn't have any of me. So in that situation, I'm like, I don't want him to go out of the tournament, but he doesn't care what I do in the tournament. It creates a different dynamic, right? It influences play. And in that scenario where you guys have both drop 50%, I think it's one of those questions that is not clear. It's not black or white, right? Like, I think it's very fair to say, hey guys, we've traded a percentage, and that's what happens. But let me tell you, in all my years of poker, all my years of final tables, I can't remember one time where someone was like, yep, I got 4% of him, 8% of that guy, 20% of that guy. I can never remember that happening even one time.
Follow-up question. Do you want to swap 5 in the Vegas man?
The World Series main event, top 5? I'll get back to you on that. Will you wear a run-it-up shirt at least?
What?
I'll think of that. Okay. Maybe we'll think of that. All right. But I get a lot of questions about how do you run a successful live stream, and it really comes down to a few key points. Number one, it's to be consistent, right? If you're going to create any piece of content that people are going to come back to regularly, you got to stream often, right? If you stream one time and not for 10 days, then 2 times and not for 6 days, people can't plan their lives around you. They can't rely on you. They can't be invested in your life. When I streamed last year, I streamed from March 1st to May 17th. I streamed for 78 days in a row. I streamed for 6.5 hours a day. I took 4 5-minute breaks in that time. You can take more breaks than that if you like. That's a bit of a psychopathic sort of thing. But you can take breaks, no problem. But streaming every single day is an amazing thing. People know you're on. They know they can come and find you. They know that your content's going to be there. They can get invested in your life and how you're doing things. Number 2, I would say it's important to create a inviting, welcoming environment. It's important to care about the people who are watching you, right? Like, whether you have 10 viewers or 10,000 viewers, if you watch all the best streamers, when the stream begins, it's, hey Lucas D, hey, coffee cup 1, 2, 3, how are you doing over there? Hey, they're very welcoming, you have to be friendly, welcoming, warm, engaging. I think that's very important, generally. Also helps to have interesting content. Right? It helps to have something that other people don't have as the third and final point, right? When I started making videos on YouTube, remember, Run It Up began as a YouTube bankroll challenge series on a Nevada-only poker site back in 2013. Okay, so when I started there, we were focused on the Nevada community, trying to make fun but interesting poker videos with a challenge as the backbone. Those of you that, I bet you, how many of you guys have watched my YouTube videos? Okay, nice. So, I haven't made a YouTube video that's new in, I don't even know how many years now, a year plus, right? But I started on YouTube with offering something that I wanted to be more interesting than a poker training video, which are often sedative alternatives, right? Who has watched a poker training video before? I mean, they're pretty boring, right? Generally speaking, if you watch them, they're obviously good content, but they can be very dry. So my goal was to make it more fun, more entertaining, and have a good time with it, and still have good poker content. That's how I started, and I took that same general idea when we moved to Twitch, and that's obviously worked out, pretty well for me since we moved there. So if you actually look at the original Run It Up episodes, episode 13, I did a Twitch stream. Or 16, something like that. So I tried to stream a couple times before on Twitch before I got the partnership with Twitch in October of 2014. So Twitch, which I said before was a live streaming platform, if you're not familiar with it, was bought by Amazon in July of 2014 for $1 billion. And when Amazon bought Twitch, Amazon said to Twitch, hey, they do video game streams at that point. They're like, hey, why don't you try other things like backgammon, music, chess, and maybe poker? So they reached out to me and said, hey, how would you feel about being one of our flagship poker streamers? And I was like, that sounds awesome. I watched a lot of content on Twitch. And so at that point, I had probably around maybe 20,000 subscribers on YouTube, and I had maybe an average of 5,000 views per video, something like that. Nothing crazy, but Twitch was a whole new medium, right? Twitch is a beautiful and amazing platform that allows for interaction unlike anything else in the world, right? If you can imagine the World Series broadcast, that's a presentation. I'm saying, here you go, World Series of Poker broadcast, there's no back and forth. Last year on Twitch, from March to the end of December alone, we had 2.25 million lines of chat. To me, that's a lot of shrieking. Right? People who are always talking, hey, why are you doing this? Hey, why are you doing that? Telling me about their lives and all these other things, so that changes the dynamic, right? We're having a conversation, we're having a dialogue, and so that's what makes Twitch special, right? And so I would say having that conversation is what had built my audience from a few thousand people who started over there. My first Twitch stream had 20 viewers, but my first one in October probably had 1,000. And we hit 37,000 concurrent human beings watching me play the World Championship of Online Poker final table back in September. We had 27,000 watching me play the Stud High Low final table in September. What? right? That was absolutely absurd, right? So to me, I feel like, again, and you look at guys like Jamie Staples, who's even a better example than me, who is not even a poker pro, really. He was just like an aspiring poker pro, showcased his journey on Twitch, created good, interesting content for his fans to watch, and people got to be root for him. They got to see his life and support him and throw him a $2 pork chop and say, oh, keep it up, Jamie Staples, you're doing good, kid. And now look where he is today. He has a beautiful PokerStars contract. He's done a great job with his brand and his life. And I think we're going to see more of that as Twitch continues to grow, as it has grown over the last few years. So you want to be a poker pro is the last point I have here on this question, on this Q&A. And I'll open up to open questions for anything else, any topic you guys want. A question I get very often is someone goes, all right, I want to be a poker professional. And I often say, no, you probably don't. That's my instant response to that. I feel like very often people have this feeling where they're like, okay, I've made 40, 50,000 playing poker. I want to play full time. I want to play more often. I want to quit my job. I want to play. And this is something that takes such serious decision making because, how often many of you have jobs, I'm sure. How often do you go to work and leave with less money than you went with? Never, right? I don't know how the health insurance system works here in Australia, but in America at least, or at least up until very recently, you had no health insurance if you're a poker player. You had no benefits. You had none of those things existed. If you're a poker player, you're on your own. And that comes with some very big perks. Wake up at any time you want, never wear pants. There's some very big perks with that. But there are a lot of pitfalls as well, right? There are a lot of dangers with that too. So what I always advise people is, if you want to be a poker professional, I would say you can very easily play poker as much as you want, especially here in Australia because you can play online and all those other things too. So I would say you can play as much as you want, weekends, nights, whatever. Keep trying, keep winning, keep playing. And if it goes really well for you and you're really crushing it, you're loving the game, you're truly, truly loving the game, I can't emphasize that enough, then go ahead. Maybe take a shot. Maybe it's worth, if you say, listen, I'm giving my job 40 hours a week for 160 hours a month, and they're paying me X. I'm making X times 2 over a very long sample size of playing poker. Okay, that seems like a good time to quit then. But if you're like, hey, I just won 22,000 playing a tournament here, I'm going to quit my job. That's probably not going to work out great for you, buddy. Right? Like you probably should pump the brakes there and drive a little slower. Right? It's one of those things where it's like you don't have to make a big jump, you don't have to take that step. You can play poker and derive significant amounts of money as part of your life without having to lose the security of a job or going to school or any of those things. Now, of course, I've done none of those in my life. I've been dropped out of school and never had a job. But, I have always, since the beginning, I have loved the game of poker. There's nothing that I've ever experienced that I've loved more than poker. Poker's given me all my best experiences. I've seen the world. Here I am. And, I've met all my best friends through poker. So for me, it was a fit. But I've seen so many people who tried and failed and maybe regretted it. Because all of a sudden they come back to the workforce at 27, left school at 20. Like, what were you doing the last 7 years, buddy? Like, I was playing poker. Doesn't always make the best or easiest life. So I would always advise, think deeply, reflect if that's really what you want, and realize you can kind of do both. There's no reason to make that big jump unless you're ready. I think that I actually got very lucky because before I came into poker, I used to teach karate to 3 to 6 year olds, which is actually very similar to talking to Twitch chat. Very similar experience. So I got to learn lessons about disguising repetition. And we always were taught to say the kids' names 3 times in every class. And, little tricks like that I think actually really helped me with talking on Twitch. It's kind of like a bizarre thing. But the answer to your question, I think, is absolutely it's going to be a better player. You can ask almost any poker coach, like a Vanessa Self sort of a coach, does it help to talk their poker hands? Oh, for sure. It's a mutual growth thing, absolutely.
But what do you do to prepare for nerves or whatever? I'm sure you don't have any nerves now, right, Robot? But
yes.
what do you do to, because you can't really practice final table at a tournament that often.
And it's a good question. You said something about how you can't prepare for a final table, or that you're going to be nervous in these situations. The answer, I think, is actually that you can, right? At our first final tables, we've all made final tables, right? Or tried at least. When we get to that first final table, it's a crazy experience. You're like, all right, there's no one left in the tournament. This is a cool thing. But of course, you're going to make mistakes, right? You're going to be paying attention to the payouts. You're going to be watching different things. Just like anything in life, it comes down to experience, right? If all of us in this room make a final table of a $100,000 buy-in tournament, we're all going to feel the pressure of that moment. We're all going to feel the anxiety of that, right? I've done it one time. I'm not going to feel much less than any of you guys, right? So I feel like, it's Brian, by the way, right? So I feel like, I got to stick that in there. But yeah, I feel like you do prepare by playing more often, by going back and watching your other final tables and saying, okay, you play, you get third, go back, look through those hands and say, where could I have won more? Where could I have lost less? When you're playing online, you have access to a beautiful hand history of exactly what took you there and what happened at the final table. You can go back through and check. Not only that, but like I said earlier, we have an absolutely nearly infinite pool of resources online. You can go back through and watch many of my final tables. I have live final tables that I've reviewed on YouTube before. I got the footage from Heartland Poker Tour to do that beautiful video there. My first final table ever live was an awesome video. If you haven't seen it, it's on my YouTube channel. And there's a variety of those of players who go back, watch their final tables or other players' final tables, and give thoughts. This was bad because of this was good because of that, and you can learn that one. That's how you prepare. Study. Here's a quick anecdote on that. I forget what tournament it was, but I had just watched a video by a guy named Sam Greenwood, who I believe is here actually at Aussie Millions. He made a video about like a 6-max pot limit Omaha turbo final table. And for some reason I saw that and I was like, okay, that's an interesting video. I had never watched something like that before, so I watched that. Flash forward to maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, I was in a situation where I was playing like a hyper turbo PLO situation, and because I had heard Max talk about the situations, he pulled up some different things. He did some math work on the video, and he went through this. And because of that, I had kind of had a bit more of an edge than I would have had if I was just there fresh. Does it make me a master? But it makes me maybe 10% less likely to bust out in certain spots or make less mistakes and those sort of things. So you can prepare if you're dedicated. I started playing, I had no expenses. I lived with my parents. If I lost all my money, I was still going to eat that night, right? There was really no disaster situation that could have occurred. And that didn't really become a thing until I was living on my own when I was 20 plus years old. And so for me, I got very lucky in that I had one pool of money and I just bought what I wanted, which wasn't very much, I mostly just reinvested in poker. But I never could really go broke because I always had that net of my parents being, So for many other people, it's a tough thing that, you want to have at least, depending on your risk tolerance, you want to have at least 6 months of life expenses put aside, right? In case things go poorly, you want to be able to live and pay your mortgage or your rent, your food, things like that. It's even harder if you have kids or a wife or a husband, and you have to support them too. Like, that becomes way more pressure, and you need to have more money put aside to support them. So making that poker jump if you have 3 kids and a wife, that's a tough thing to do, right? I mean, we all kind of understand that. I was in a perfect situation where nothing could happen that was all that bad. So sometimes it comes down to right place, right time to make the best of these situations. And I would say, as far as your poker bankroll goes, it's important to have an understanding of what the games you have access to are, right? Here in Australia, you guys have online poker and live poker options. Sweet. In America, people ask me all the time, how can I play poker? Or, how do I go pro? I live in Oklahoma. The casino that's closest is 4 hours away. They can't play online in any kind of safe and fair guaranteed site. Don't play poker full time, no way. I would tell them to never, just play for fun. You just can't do it regardless of bankroll management. But if you live in a place where you're close to a 20-40 Omaha 8 or better game, and that game is the best game in the nearest mile, the bankroll for that game is maybe $10,000. Is okay? You got $10,000. You got $15,000. You can okay. My expenses are $1,000 a month or whatever it is. Put that aside. $10,000 for the bankroll. You have to realize what games you're looking to play and go from there. Right, so I would say, depending on your risk tolerance, right? There are some players who just don't care. They can lose 10% and not feel anything or more. And, I would say 3% is usually where you want to be at for your entire poker bankroll. $2,000 set aside. 1-2 is too big for you with $2,000, right? You probably want to play $57 at biggest, and even smaller than that is okay. The more tables you play if you're playing online, the more bankroll you want. The less players at the table, because that increases the swings of the game. If you're playing heads up, you probably want to have closer to 50 buy-ins, or 2% of your bankroll when you're playing per game. And tournaments, again, because tournaments are more of a long game, you want to have closer to 2% for tournament bankrolls. But people usually forget that you can take a one-off shot, right? If you have $10,000, you're playing $100 buy-ins, $200 buy-ins, $300 buy-ins. If there's a great 1K event, you go, okay, I'm gonna take one shot here, gonna see what happens. But that's what satellites are for. That's what networking is for. So you can tell, hey, buddy, you want to take $500,000 in this tournament for $500? Sweet, everybody wins. You play less, they get a piece of you, etc. So. Back when I was maybe 22 years old, it was the golden era of my poker life, and I had the fortune of having two $500,000 scores in the same year, which is amazing. One I played, and one I had 80% of somebody who won $500,000 on his own. So it was an amazing year for me back in, I think it was 2008, 2009, and I, at the time, had an ongoing deal with Daniel Negreanu, that he took all my action, or half my action, something like that, in exchange for a third of the results, or whatever the deal was. It was a very good deal for me. But I went to Daniel, and this is right after the World Series one year, and I was like, hey Daniel, I got $1 million. I don't need you to keep backing me anymore in these tournaments. I've done pretty well for myself now. And then he goes, oh wow, that's awesome, good job, that's great. And he pauses for a second, and I promise you I will never forget this exchange. He goes, whoa, wait, is this your first time having $1 million? And I was like, yes. And he goes, ha, you'll lose it for sure. And I was like, what are you talking about, Daniel Negreanu? I will not. I did. Yeah. Like I said, there's something that's very beautiful about the game of poker, very democratic, We all get the same cards, the same chips, and we're left to make our own decisions from there, right? And so I feel like what I've tried to kind of exude is that poker is a fun game. I want people to try poker, see if you enjoy it. And if you want to be a pro, it's going to take a lot of work. And I've tried to make sure people, realize that. I don't think it's like the easy way to make a living. There's a saying in poker that says, if you're smart enough to make a living at poker, you're smart to do something else. And that is absolutely true.